This is the Infrastructure Matters podcast, brought to you by the Futurum Group. We explore the latest developments in hybrid cloud computing and the technology that underpins it. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the latest trends and technologies that are shaping the hybrid cloud computing landscape. The Infrastructure Matters podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now your co-hosts, Steven Dickens, Camberley Bates, and Krista Macomber of the Futurum Group.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Infrastructure Matters. I think we're up to episode 14. I'm joined as always by Camberley and Krista. Hey, welcome to the show.
And good morning. We still have more stuff to talk about, which kind of boggles me. Usually you're talked out by now, but here we go again.
I think tech is busy enough that we're going to have stuff to talk about every week.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, again, another busy week. We say that every week. I think we had a couple of quiet weeks over the summer, but that was about it. I think we're now into announcement season until we get to Thanksgiving, and then we'll maybe pause for a week. But, yeah, maybe not. The UK and Europe doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving, so I'm sure somebody will announce something that week. So, pretty packed week, as we say. I'm going to cover a bunch of AWS announcements. They've been thick and fast this week. But maybe, Krista, let's go to you first. What's top of mind for you this week?
Sure. So one thing that kind of jumped out to me this week was the fact that Symantec announced that they're going to be integrating a kind of specific AI, generative AI engine from Google incrementally into their product portfolio moving forward. So specifically, that was the Google Cloud Security AI Workbench. And what's interesting here is that Google actually utilized its acquisition from last year of a company called Mandiant, which provides kind of threat intelligence, to create a large language model specific to security. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Symantec kind of utilizes this kind of AI engine from Google, and in particular, kind of some of the broader implications across security. So looking at capabilities like being able to get more context into potential threats, be able to kind of navigate them more in kind of a more natural way, in a way that kind of humans can comprehend, a little bit better, and to be able to do that in a way that's, kind of faster and more timely. I know that we have kind of a whole host of other security related announcements and also generative AI related announcements that we're going to be covering. But thinking about kind of the impact from an infrastructure perspective, which is, of course, what we're here to talk about today. From my perspective, it'll be interesting to see how this kind of an announcement can help with things like data loss prevention, given that we are seeing there's kind of a closer working relationship today between security teams and IT operations. So again, I thought it was pretty interesting and something that we could definitely talk about.
Fantastic.
You know, Krista, many years ago, when I was probably about your age, I still remember, right, there was this movement for security companies and data protection companies to merge together. And we saw that when Symantec bought Veritas, and then Veritas split off again. We saw that with Dell buying what was the name of the company that they bought? That's a security company. We saw that. Yeah. We saw that whole lot of the companies were doing that, and it was not successful. Every one of those split up again, or they held those companies as kind of standalone companies. Today, that has so shifted. And the reason why, I saw that it wouldn't work, because when you went to the clients, there was the security guys, and they did their thing. And then there was the data protection guys that were the last guys on the list in the IT operations. And there were two different decision-making people. And for salespeople to go in there and talk to them, you didn't have any kind of overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Today, that has fundamentally changed. And everything we're looking at, and all the data we're looking at, some data that we're doing for clients, some data we're doing internally ourselves, those security groups and those data protection groups are now at the hip, some way, somehow.
Yeah.
And that has changed everything in how we look at this world. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think, maybe from a day-to-day basis, I think we're maybe still kind of seeing that things are still being ironed out a little bit in terms of, how this collaboration is going to look like in execution, what tools are required. But I definitely agree. I think there's this sense that we all have this common vision, common goal that we're driving towards in terms of what does security mean for our organization, for our company. And so absolutely, I think that's what's kind of driving that at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that gives a segue to some of the topics that I think you've been thinking about this week. Camberley, what's been top of mind for you?
A lot of things, but I sit on several different councils. And this last week, I sat through another CIO council. And one of the topics that came up on that council was about cyber insurance. Many companies, some companies have cyber insurance, some haven't. We saw, a big uptick of it, during the 2020 year, and people adding to it. We saw these cyber insurance companies lose a bunch of money. And they were getting hit pretty hard. So those contracts have changed. And frankly, I haven't really watched the contracts as much. I've listened to different people, over the years about what does it take to get to on these cyber insurance contracts. But there were two big things that were brought up. One of the people were talking about what it took for them to get, they were changing companies. So they had to move from one company to another company. The level of effort, usually when you're getting your life insurance, they're inspecting your entire body. Well, now what they're doing is inspecting your entire set and IT environment and every orifice that is around there. I'm sorry if that's a really bad picture, but that's kind of where I went to.
Yeah, thank you for that adjective. That was fantastic. That really painted the picture for all of the listeners.
Yeah, but it essentially is what they're doing. And you could listen to him and about the level of effort. And this was a smaller company, so it's not like I was talking about a JP Morgan or something like that was going through. This is a relatively, mid-sized company that's spending a good full-time 80 hours on filling out this stuff. That's full-time. That's not calendar time. That's full-time and getting it done for that. The second piece of it was, and they were being asked about what some of the things that were being looked at, especially not even RBAC is like, okay, RBAC, that's check button. That should have been done 2 years ago. We're talking new privileges, expanded privileges, something called PIM, privileged identity management, that has, that was what they're really, really important to them. And that's part of it is this double authorization of people to do anything that, frankly, pisses all the users off, but is being required for, if you're going to get security insurance. One of the other thing somebody was, when in the group was talking about is saying the rates are down. And that's kind of interesting. Why are the rates are down? Okay, so probably because they're doing a better job of, discriminating, or not discriminating, but authorizing and looking at looking at the information. But here's the other one. There's a war clause. And the war clause is basically saying that if it is state sponsored, who that might be, Russia, China,
North Korea,
all hands off.
Yep.
They're not responsible. And so I'm like, oh, well, that kind of like takes 50% of the hits out of there. And it's kind of like, okay, so this has really, really changed. So, this is an area that we need to go explore some more on, but it's kind of like, okay, so, and I would love to hear from our end users, anybody that wants to pipe in on this as well. We're going to dig some more on it because we've got some more time with some of these guys that we're going to be talking to, but that was the other piece of it. That was, one of the other big things that we were talking about. So I'll turn it back to you.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, Krista, we were on that briefing with Telesign earlier this week, and just it wasn't on our docket to talk about, but it makes perfect sense given what Camberley was just talking about, the work we're doing to kind of look at that market I was fascinated by the breadth and depth of their offerings to really, that's more on the mobile side and on the end user side, but it was fascinating.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was kind of the same thought I had. And so how do we, look at different potential indicators of, verifying that this truly is the individual that it's supposed to be, whether it be, things like how the phone number is being utilized and things like that. So it's, I think, very complicated. And I think that's where we're going to see, as you mentioned, Stephen, some of these solutions like telesign can kind of come to bear and, hopefully make that at least a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, it was the breadth of what you need to authorize. You get those codes sent through to you, the one-time codes, but the amount of analytics and stuff that's going on to go, is it actually you that's requesting that one-time code? Has the SIM been swapped? Has
Yeah.
is this part of a number range where they've gone and got sort of 200,000 telephone numbers and they're making this request across the breadth of numbers? Fascinating update from Seth and the team at Telesign. So we're going to be digging on that space. So the big news for me this week, switching topic, AWS has been active in the AI space. Huge investment into Anthropic, which was fascinating, really sort of cementing some of their position there. It's interesting. There's 4 or 5 of these AI vendors, the large language model vendors. All of the cloud providers are running to, either make investments or to form partnerships. We've seen Oracle with Cohere. We've seen, obviously, Microsoft with OpenAI. This announcement this week with Anthropic, $4 billion. Not a lot of detail of what that looks like. I think that's a headline number personally, and it's cloud credits. I think if you work on the principle, maybe AWS is making 50%. Yes, if Anthropic was paying list price for those credits, they'd be paying $4 billion. They're obviously not paying list price. Maybe it's more like a $2 billion investment.
Okay, 2 billion, 4 billion, who cares?
I mean, what's a couple of billion?
Excuse me, it's a pretty big investment.
It's a big investment.
And a fairly small company.
Yeah.
In terms of people.
I think it's going to, the interesting piece for me is going to be to see how AWS embeds Anthropic in some of its offerings and the technology collaboration they're going to have around their custom silicon of Inferentia and Trainium. So, obviously, AWS is partnered with NVIDIA. Jensen and that leather jacket have been everywhere from a partnership and collaboration point of view recently, but it's interesting that AWS, in a different way to Microsoft, and in a similar move to Google, is doing their own custom silicon. We've got the TPUs from Google. We've got Inferentia and Trainium from AWS. So it's going to be interesting for me to kind of see, once you get past the headline $4 billion, strategic investment, what this is actually going to mean when we get into the technology roadmaps, whether we're going to see Anthropic embedded into a lot of AWS offerings. They've also this week, and I'm halfway through a research note that is already 1,200 words long. And that's me summarizing massively pages and pages of blogs and details. AWS has been announcing updates to Bedrock, its Titan language model, also put a bunch of stuff out there about responsible AI sort of policies and procedures. So the keeping up with AI at the moment is just almost, and we do have a team that is their full-time job, and even those guys can't keep up. It's just crazy the amount of announcements that are coming out.
Yeah. Is there maybe a common theme, Stephen, that you're kind of seeing? I know I kind of felt similar when I was covering their security summit, Reinforce, earlier this year. It was navigating this whole slew of announcements. So was there maybe kind of a common theme or two that you're seeing? Or
Well, I'm starting to see the same language models pop up. So you're
Okay.
seeing Llama, you're seeing Titan, you're starting to see some of these same language models start to pop up. So I don't think we're at the point, we talked about Anthropic, we talked about Cohere. You're starting to see the same names of vendors starting. So I don't think we're at the point of consolidation yet, but it's starting to feel like the 6 or 7 names that you're seeing all the same at the same time, which is good. The other key theme, as I just talked about, is custom silicon. There's either just go throw a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs at it, or there's kind of stuff that's coming out with custom silicon. IBM made announcements this week in the mainframe space using their Telum chip for more transactional AI. So this is kind of in the flow of a credit card transaction, so sort of real time, not so GPU, but more processor and memory based. So I think you're going to see a sort of silicon thread. You're going to see some language consolidation. I mean, there's hundreds of models on Hugging Face, and I think you're still going to see hundreds of models because people are going to have particular use cases or going to do particular things. We saw Getty Images launch their sort of generative AI. That's a pretty specific use case that something like a Cohere or a Anthropic or a Llama model's probably not the best thing for. So I think you're going to see some specifics. But I think you're going to see, and I mean, Intel's making it sort of waves with what it's doing at the so there's kind of a hardware piece and a consolidation around models, but everybody buddying up with everybody else is I don't think any one vendor is going to lead this along the complete stack. Google and AWS are probably the most vertical stack of all of this. Microsoft's decided not to get into custom silicon, so
Well, they're doing some.
yeah,
They're doing some. They're not just not at the level of all the other people maybe investing in. I know this week we had our IT Insight community, our end users that gather more on the technical line from our traditional business that we've had with the data people. And so it's an intimate roundtable group, and we talked about CXL, which is the technology that's being driven to enable scaling of memory and sharing of memory across servers, et cetera. And so we were giving them an update. They wanted it, even though we're probably a good year out before CXL actually makes it into the market. It's just into the standard market. Where it's right now is it's being tested out by the Dells and the HPs in their server environments using the Sapphire and the Genoa processors that are coming out with the PCIe bus. These Microsoft and AWS both have initiatives that are working on CXL. And the reason being is that what's enabling is very large databases in memory. And, probably up to like a terabyte size database in memory, like SAP, et cetera. But what they're really interested in is being able to use this to train because it's much faster. Of course, if you're doing IOs to memory as opposed to IOs to drives, your speed massively increases, and I get a whole lot more efficiency coming out of my CPUs and my GPUs and being able to share it across. So they are investing in that, and they will be out the door before we see probably Dell, HPE, or any of the other server vendors out the door and available to the regular market.
Yeah.
For their own systems. Now, lots of people are involved in this effort. You notice I didn't mention Google, because Google is very heavily invested in the consortium and development with, I think there's about 250 companies in the consortium that are working on it. So
fascinating. Well, I mean, as I say, always a busy week in tech. I think the big topic that we've got to dive into and where we'll spend the next sort of 10 minutes of the show is our headline topic for this week, which is some of the restructuring that we see going on. HP have come out this week with a pretty major restructure that kicks off when their financial year kicks off on 1st of November. I've also been spending a bunch of time this week chatting to reporters about the Splunk and Cisco piece, and now we're past the news and people are starting to think about how that's going to operationally be restructured. We just talked about AI. Krista and Camberley, maybe you lead off here and talk about some of the stuff we're seeing from HP and how Antonio's going to sort of reshape that business and kind of move it into a different focus starting for 1st of November.
Sure. Camberley, do you want to kick it off? Or?
Yeah, I can kick it off. So the announcement that came out was creating this hybrid cloud segment. Fidelma Russo, who's been the CTO at HPE, is going to be heading up that group. And they've moved in, a lot of that GreenLake. You still have your server groups, you still have your networking groups, you still have the HPC Cray group, but this one is kind of moving all of the items that are really into the hybrid cloud, GreenLake, and services market under one umbrella. They've had a lot of like private cloud initiatives going on. All those private cloud initiatives, some of those are combining underneath Tom Black. And Tom Black used to be running all of the storage side of it. And we've also moved storage into this group too, recognizing a level of recognition, or at least if you read through the elements, there's a level of recognition that this is core to the systems that are being run. The storage group is still separate under Fidelma, but the hybrid cloud crew which had been separate, the storage group that had been separate is now being looked into a similar group. So it's more investment in saying, and my perspective is more invested in the concept of as a service within GreenLake, bringing out offerings that work very well together, and those investments that will be made. So that's kind of
where do you see Zerto and Aruba as kind of brands fitting? Maybe Krista, that's a question for you.
Well, the Aruba is still a different brand. Aruba is still out there. It's a separate part of that group. The Zerto is in that group, as well as the Esmeralda, which is MapR, and I believe OpsRamp is in that group in terms of the software offerings. I'm not sure what other software offerings are in there, but go ahead. Krista, you were also working on that one too.
Yeah, the commentary I was going to provide. So we actually had the opportunity just maybe 2-3 weeks ago to meet with the Zerto team, and it's always great to meet with them. And the sense that we got was that HP is letting them kind of continue to kind of remain Zerto, continue to kind of drive the investments on the DR side. We are seeing that Zerto is being folded in and being delivered as a part of GreenLake. So to Camberley's commentary regarding kind of the shift to delivering more of the capabilities and functionality as a service. What we'll be watching for as well is sort of how that becomes integrated with what HP does more on your traditional kind of operational recovery, as I kind of call it, because Zerto is more kind of DR and kind of replication from that perspective. So seeing how that fits in with what HPE is doing with Store Once, which is kind of the software code for their backup and recovery, because we are seeing that's being folded into GreenLake as well. So to answer the question, Steven, I think HP brought up Aruba as well. And I think HPE has kind of learned through the Aruba acquisition that if we let this team continue to do what they do well and continue to kind of drive that focus in that particular area, then it kind of really sets that team up to be successful underneath the umbrella of HPE. So from what the sense that we get is that they're kind of allowing Zerto to continue to do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how HPE restructures. I think there's you touched on it, Camberley. They've been kind of doing everything on private cloud, and I'm not fully up to date yet. And I know Daniel spoke to Antonio this week, so I haven't yet to debrief with him. But it seems a simpler, cleaner model that's going to make it easier for them to go to market. That's my takeaway. I memean, this is still relatively early and dropped this week, and we'll obviously get more in the weeks ahead. But it looks simpler for me.
It is simpler. They've had a lot of products within that kind of space for quite some time, so it needs to be rationalized out. I think Tom Black is watching him operate. He's a driver. And he's got strong vision and strong opinions. So he's that's going to probably kind of move products into a reasonable understanding. The one thing that's an outlier is Nutanix. They sell Nutanix, and that gets sold through their server group. So that's going to continue out there. So it's how does Nutanix play out with the success that they've had with HPE and their offering over there, as opposed to what these other pieces of, because Nutanix is clearly a private cloud. They're now moved into the container space. They're definitely driving their own VM as they're getting, as clients are looking for options to get off of VMware. This is an option on the HV offering. So that will be one area that they'll need to resolve in their go-to-market. And what I look at often is sales initiative. How am I getting paid to sell? Because that changes behaviors about how a salesperson presents offerings to their clients. And it's important to make sure that it's that's balanced, so the customer is getting the right thing presented to them, and not just something that because it's in my bag of tricks, so I'm offering that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the other big sort of restructuring piece, it's interesting. You can always kind of see where people are starting to think from some of your conversations with the press and the questions that they ask. I've had a couple of conversations this week with the press around the big news that Cisco was buying Splunk was last week. Now the press is starting to think, well, how are they actually going to restructure this? How's the products going to come together? So probably the other big restructuring sort of thought as the tech industry kind of rebalances is, what is Cisco going to do with its expanded software portfolio? Are they going to, my whole conversation with one of the reporters was, is Cisco going to create a software business? Where's the leadership team within Splunk going to land? How's that going to manifest itself? Are they going to structure around security and observability as two core offerings? Is it Cisco software with both of those capabilities? Or do you run it as two software businesses, one focused on security? What assets from Cisco's existing portfolio transfer? Do they transfer over to Cisco software? Do you keep the Splunk brand? All of those sort of organizational questions, and unsurprisingly, Cisco and Splunk have given us no details as yet. But that doesn't.
They're not. They haven't merged yet, so they can't do anything. That goes the same with VM.
A week.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a week. What are they doing?
Right.
What are they waiting for?
And we're in year 2 with Broadcom and VMware. So there you are. Yes. And that one's coming closer. And I take a perspective. I mean, what they need to be thinking about is, what does the end user need? What is the IT end user? And this goes back to, I started out talking about, that process of how they acquired security and data protection. Well, they don't, the end users don't reorganize just because Splunk and Cisco decide to merge together. Same thing goes on with Broadcom and VMware. They don't do the same thing. What the end user is looking at, the IT end user is looking at with Broadcom IT, is going, okay, we've seen what they do to some of those other companies. What am I going to get with that VMware? And we've seen the behaviors that they've had, which is either, putting contracts together and getting ready for Broadcom to raise the prices or whatever they do. So you have to look over and say, if I am an end user looking at Cisco and Splunk, I'm going to go, okay, so where are you putting your engineering skills? Where's engineering going?
Yeah.
And if the engineering is not going where I want it to go, then what's my options? And so those are the kind of things they're going to be looking at.
I think you hit on that. You've hit on two key points for me, Camberley. Where does the investment dollars in engineering go, and what is the sales go-to-market model? What do sales reps get paid on, and how does the engineering team spend it? I mean, Hock's been pretty emphatic about a $2 billion investment in VMware's portfolio. That's going to be interesting. I think we're going to have to see the same from Splunk. Cisco's going to have to be declarative. I think where Gary Steele's made some good progress over the last 18 months has been feature velocity and product roadmap velocity at Splunk. Mm-hmm. That's going to have to continue. I mean, that space is, particularly in security, very fragmented. And if they're going to continue arguably a leadership position.
Yeah.
We'll be tracking where the R&D dollars go, I think, as analysts.
Right, and then
Yeah.
the same thing will go. I'm sorry, Krista. I'm
No,
talking
you're
to
good.
you, but the same thing goes on with HPE. We're going to
Yeah.
look and see what does Tom Black's organization look like? How is he bringing that together? Where is the engineering resources going? When we'll have a new leader, and that hasn't been announced yet on the storage side, or it hasn't been announced publicly, so I can't talk about it. But there'll be a new leader over there, and what are they going to be doing in terms of the investments that are being made in that space? And then also, as I said, we watch and see. Okay, so what do those comp plans look like? When it comes out, because you follow the money to understand how things are going to move.
Yeah,
and
salespeople pay pulls through the revenue that then pulls through the structure of the business, for sure.
Vending machines, just call it a vending machine.
Coin operated sales force.
Coin operated.
Krista, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to agree. Certainly, I think in looking at kind of the Splunk customer base, so during this transition period, can Cisco really work with those customers to say, okay, here is where we're going to maybe infuse some R&D spend to kind of accelerate some innovation, in some areas where the portfolio is maybe stagnated a little bit, and just kind of building on the comment regarding kind of the sales initiatives, potentially from a price perspective as well, especially if the sales force is incentivized. Now that Splunk is being integrated into an even larger company, will there be some benefits of scale there that can maybe benefit the customer at the end of the day through getting more attractive pricing? So from my perspective, I think those are two big things that I'll be looking for, and hopefully see that Cisco can kind of work with customers to have some of those conversations, even though it is early days.
Yeah, 2024 is going to be an interesting year as the industry restructures and reformats. Well, you've been listening to the Infrastructure Matters podcast. Please do the click and subscribe thing. That helps the algorithm. We'll put some of the research that we've been talking about in the show notes, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much for watching.